My name is Matt Ocko. I'm the co-founder and co-managing partner of a firm called Data Collective. We have a reasonable amount of VC experience. In a little over 20 years, we've done over 250 companies, generated about 25 or $30 billion of value for founders and early investors. And in that multi-decade span and large number of companies, we've had fewer than 25 losses. So in a baseball metaphor, we've batted about 900% or 900, which means that my wife gives me crap about quitting to become a baseball player because I'd probably make more money. But anyway, we've been at this game for a long time. One of the most transformative things in our world, in the VC world, has been AWS, and we've actually watched AWS as a platform change the way that companies can get from an idea to Series A. So the title of the piece, From AWS to Series A in 5 Easy Pieces, is what I want to talk about today. So what you're seeing here is my belief of a widely held view of VC and startups and the interaction between the two. For those of you who aren't familiar with this is the infamous Underpants Gnomes episode from South Park, in which small gnomes covertly stealing underwear in the middle of the night, when confronted with a request for their business plan, say, phase 1, collect underpants, phase 3, profit. And when pressed on the vast swath of goop in between the two, simply shrug. Well, it may look that mysterious, but actually from a VC perspective, the things that persuade us that you can get from phase 1 to phase 3, although technically we never have funded a pure underpants collection startup, is in fact knowable. There are things that correlate to what we view not just as a fundable startup, but one that we view as correlating to a good use of your time over the 7 to 10 years of hard work that it takes to create a real exit. So we don't think it's that bad, and we think, in fact, as I said, AWS is transformative, that it can help. Well, the first thing that it can do is reduce your startup cost. It can accelerate your time to market. It can help you create a differentiated startup and get VC's attention. This is a subtle but important point. The less time you spend dealing with cruft, and the more time that you spend actually innovating, the more interested VCs are going to be in your startup. You can prove to VCs that there's an enterprise-grade product. Well, you know, in the dark old days of the early 2000s, doing the equivalent of hot failover between availability zones, and I see there's some people in the audience older than 12, so you may, like me, remember this. You were talking about millions of dollars and at least high single digits, if not double-digit counts of very bright people that could otherwise be spent working on product features. And last but not least, AWS can help you get customers more rapidly. And again, this is not just because I'm in the tank for Amazon. I'm not a stockholder in Amazon. I haven't been compensated in any way, nor my startups. I just genuinely believe that these things have become true, which is good for you guys and it's good for us as investors. And I'll get into some more detail on this customer issue. So what do these things help you do? Well, they help you preserve founder equity. The less money you spend on generating a startup, the faster you get to market, the more robust your startup appears, the more you persuade VCs that you're differentiated, the more equity you keep, the less money you're raising from us at potentially abusive valuations. When you pitch to a VC and you say, I've met all these characteristics, you definitely increase your chances of funding. You decrease your time to get funding. There's a phrase that's used in Silicon Valley, the sandhill shuffle, which implies an endless, sad shuffle of an entrepreneur between various sandhill road VC firms begging for money. Well, if you can cut that amount of time from months to weeks, then that's good for you. You're building more interesting stuff. It's good for us. We're investing in a company that's more robust. It can help increase your valuation in Series A. If you show up with something amazing with 10,000 enterprise customers that you built on your credit cards and a loan from a disgruntled third cousin, then you're going to get a higher valuation in Series A than you otherwise would. And last but not least, the more robust, the more scalable, the more persuasive your company is, the more likely you're going to get a higher valuation in subsequent rounds and, again, preserve more of your founder's equity. So what are the 5 easy pieces? And I should caution you that this is extremely subjective. This is not blessed by Mike Moritz or John Doerr. I didn't review this with Mark Andreessen before presenting this. This is my observation based on 20 plus years in the business of what you can do in concert with AWS to produce fundable startups faster at better valuations. So the first thing is be brave. Even in very heavily regulated industries, go where others fear. Does your friend say that HIPAA-related companies are a cluster you-know-what? Do you have a friend buried in the bowels of some Fortune 500 company who spent years battling Sarbox or Dodd-Frank regulations? Do you know a colonel in the Air Force who says, don't even think about government procurement? Well, those are actually positive signs. And I'm going to get into specifically how we believe that AWS changes the game there. When you are using AWS, we recommend that you be simple but smart. Don't use features you don't need. I realize that's slightly counter to my host's intent. In fact, you should use every single feature and as many instances as possible all the time. In fact, keep them nailed up and ideally buy 11 years in advance. Okay, check. But seriously, from a funding perspective, as much as AWS is transformative, simplicity in engineering design matters, as you guys know better than I do, and you want to keep your failure modes minimal so that when our evil little associate with 4 degrees from MIT and a PhD from Caltech and no experience in your world decides that he's going to show how smart he is by attacking your infrastructure, you don't want failure modes. You want to design for resiliency and uptime. Assume you're going to be hacked, crashed, attacked, fat-fingered. VCs actually care about robustness because if you get a bunch of customers and then you lose them, that's not very interesting to us. Plan for scale. If you walk into my office at least and you have something that only serves 100 seats or a gigabyte of data a day or one food truck on alternate Wednesdays level of economic activity, that's not very interesting. We don't want to see you guys building grandiose pyramids up front, but we also want to see design for scale in place and some proof that you can scale. And last but not least, there's this notion of building for the zero-touch sale. And I'll describe why the zero-touch sale, in fact, is itself illusory, but you want a top-level objective of making customer engagement frictionless. And again, AWS, in my opinion, has changed the way that this is possible. In the dark old days of, well, heck, I go all the way back to the 1980s, you might have to show up with a Mack truck full of gear to persuade a skeptical VP or CIO that you had a credible offering. Today, you can point them to a web link, and AWS has been a huge part of making that cost-effective and possible. So a little more color. Why do we want you to be brave? We don't want to fund the 11th SaaS whatever. We don't want to be the 15th Wi-Fi chip company or the 97th chat application that serves people who like pogo sticks while eating cream pie. We're not interested in narrowly sliced hobby companies. We're interested in things that are going to be really big and moreover defensible. And your bravery, your attacking complex markets, is a signal to us that you're doing that. Why do we want you to be simple but smart? It's not because we're obsessive about engineering. Okay, I lied. We are actually kind of obsessive about engineering, at least in our firm. But simplicity correlates to getting something launched more quickly, that's more robust, which means fast adaptation, which means lower risk for you and lower risk for our money. We want you to design for resiliency because we're enterprise and deep tech investors, and enterprises at least don't tolerate broken consumer, you know what. It's fine when WhatsApp is down for 14 hours, but if you go talk to an enterprise that rolled over to Gmail and found that their CEO couldn't send regulatory emails for 9 hours one day, they're pretty torqued. And that enterprise is probably going to exchange or some other alternative. We want you to plan for scale because, as I said before, we're not interested in investing in tiny businesses. And we want you to build as much as possible for that zero-touch sale, for seamlessness, because the first to the customer these days often wins. There are plenty of counterexamples. Sun to Apollo, or NetApp to Auspex. There are more recent examples like the 1,000 corpses of companies trying to do what Workday or SuccessFactors did, for example, and somehow those guys had the magical recipe to succeed. But the fact is, broadly speaking, if you look at it on a statistical basis, the startup that gets the mostest customers the firstest, yes, that was horribly ungrammatical, wins. So let me get into a little more detail here. When I say brave and I say it's possible to attack regulated industries, I'm not being generic about that. You can turn what used to be insane amounts of CapEx, tens of millions of dollars of ugly, Oracle licenses and EMC boxes into a scattering of large instances and, RDS payments. Moreover, you can now assure your customers that their data is safe. In fact, safer than it might be in your own set of machines tossed up in Equinix. I realize I'm preaching to the choir in some perspective, but you can't understand how transformative this is relative to these regulated industries. These really were impossible to attack at low cost through something like AWS until very recently. And there's not a lot of competition here, so we encourage you to go nuts. VPC is an important part of that. You have a customer who says, well, we've got this complex key management system, and how are you going to solve key escrow, and I need to have at least secondary, certainly tertiary control over my data provenance. Ta-da, Cloud HSM. And again, not blindly in favor of AWS, but they're one of the few people who are making this stuff work in the cloud. You have a customer who says, I need my data encrypted at rest. I don't trust you. You've got to pass this audit or that audit, or I need to be able to perform random tests. Heck, maybe I'm going to have white hat hackers hack you and see if I can read the data. There's awesome compute-efficient soft crypto that you can apply to huge blocks of data that you have stuck in S3. And for somebody who says, I want to look at my data in 40 years, now there's Glacier. So this stuff used to be tens to hundreds of millions of dollars across the life of a startup. It's now very cheap. And I should mention as well, when you have folks who push you on auditability, VCs look at what these enterprise customers are asking for, and we say, oh, well, third parties like Loggly and internal tools like CloudTrail, that will satisfy most of the CIOs that we deal with. So if you're using that, that makes your startup fundable and interesting. These combinations of technologies are now good enough for the CIA and significant numbers of the Fortune 500. So our view as investors are things like HIPAA and Sarbox and Dodd-Frank are good barriers. If you are running a startup and you are using these kind of AWS tools to say, I can address deeply regulated, highly cranky, maybe even outright surly industries, that's interesting to us because you're creating more defensible startups. What do we mean by be simple but smart in detail? Well, don't over-engineer. When you walk into a VC's office and they're doing a technical review on you and you say, well, we've got 200,000 instances running and we we realize we're being virtualized on top of AWS's modified Zen hypervisor kernel, but we wrote everything in x86 assembler for performance. We reinvented most of the modern internet. That's not impressive to us. That just says that you're batshit crazy. And we understand that there's a balance between needing to do robust engineering to accomplish certain technical advantages and doing stuff quick and dirty, but we want to see good judgment here. So if you're not doing crazy numbers of transactions per second, elastic load balancing works fine. If you're trying to get something up and running that's even still reasonably complex, don't be ashamed about using Beanstalk. If you need to do good but not, 500 petabyte world-leading, analytics, we don't care that your self-join was done in Redshift or that your basic customer record maintenance is done in RDS. You don't have to show off. Spend your engineering on things that actually confer real sustainable competitive advantage to you. Consider your costs before implementing. What do I mean by this? Well, a lot of people say, I don't want to be trapped in this or that AWS feature. And our response to that is, your startup funding, whether it's seed or whether you've taken Series A from larger VCs, that's your lifeblood. And it's easy to burn through that stuff. So we don't have a particular point of view, but correlated to the over-engineering point, don't burn your time and money doing stuff on bare metal that you don't have to. Understand your management cost, because that's a hidden cost. You can say, well, I had to tweak the Redshift ETL pipeline, and that's really a pain in my ass, so I'm just going to do it myself on bare metal. Well, your management costs for those extra 300 nodes might be greater than just going with the flow. We encourage you to be reductionist about core processes. So what does this mean? Where you can use AWS to simplify, it's huge time value. And actually, I probably should come back to that point. If you can say, yeah, well, I could make this process really elegant and super robust, and I'm going to have the processes on a single node vote against each other to verify uptime, or you can just say if the thing blows up, I'm going to fail over to another AZ. We're okay with that. We want you to focus on the code that delights customers and gets you revenue. So speaking of resiliency, we encourage you to think in terms of multiple availability zones from day one. Use AWS features to manage this complexity where it makes sense for you. Again, don't over-engineer. RDS happens to run okay across multiple availability zones. If you're not doing 150 million TPCC per second, don't be shy about relying on stuff that already works. We are going to push you on how you deliver continuity, especially enterprise investors. So where you can design for statelessness, please do. Where you can't, use your friendly neighborhood tools to back up data. If you're in a meeting with me or another technically competent VC and we say, where's your customer data at time t sub I? And you say, well, it's in transit, or if it fails, we can recover from X, Y, or Z. If it seems shifty, you're not going to seem like the kind of robust enterprise that we want to invest in. And again, AWS makes it a lot easier than it used to be. Understand what's going on in your infrastructure. There are a crap load of tools out there to make this possible. The number, I'm sure you guys are all very sophisticated, and again, I'm preaching to the choir, but the number of startups that walk through my door and don't use things like CloudWatch or don't use things like New Relic to actually have a deep understanding of their applications, their distributed applications performance is actually remarkably high. So last but not least, and this is different from backing up customer data, We're interested, especially in enterprise startups, for things that have true redundancy, that have hot failover, that are able to roll compute seamlessly from place to place. One startup, actually startup serving startups, that's actually impressed us is a company called Cloud Velocity, which does pretty seamless hot disaster recovery and HA intra and inter AZs. So I mentioned them for that reason. We want you to plan for scale. So simplicity pays off. By this we mean if you have a relatively simple and robust structure, you can clone it inside an AZ, you can clone it across AZs, and you can manage coordination relatively simply with existing open source tools or modest but clever engineering on your own right. Again, where you can rely on AWS for scaling stuff out, do so. Consider in advance how demand will burst. If I'm not the one asking you that question, my evil little associate will be. I actually don't have an evil little associate, but I love using that phrase because those are the guys who tortured me when I was an entrepreneur. Like making me reprove Maxwell's equations from first principles when I was trying to get an email company funded. But anyway, consider in advance how your demand will burst. Again, figure out the trade-offs, where you can rely on AWS for bursting, for true elasticity, and where you have to engineer it yourself. Where you can be lazy, I use that term in a joking sense, do so. Understand your costs. Remember, your cash is your lifeblood. Don't use nodes like cannon fodder. There's solutions like Cloudability, another startup that we like, that will tell you how much money you're spending. Now, I understand that part of my license to speak here was based on telling you to use all of your seed and Series A funding solely on AWS, but it's okay, save some for yourself, for your employees, maybe your wives. And last but not least, culture is part of successful scaling. So by this I mean, there are some startups that walk through the doors of our office and they say, we can scale to 1 billion customers, every single mobile user on the face of the planet. We say, how are you going to do that? And they say, well, here are 17 ex-Google engineers and our 4 Facebook engineers and our 11 PhDs, and we're raising $30 million at a $270 million pre, and as an added benefit, we'll let you mow our lawn on Sunday. Okay. And why aren't you just using the built-in AWS features that everybody else does? Well, those aren't nearly good enough. We like excellence in engineering. We like cunning. We like people who have deep, dark, defensible tech. But when they're just preening about it, when it's become toxic or overboard, that's a negative signal to us as investors. So think, and it's not just us, it's pretty much everybody up and down metaphorical Sandhill Road, so think carefully about that. We encourage you to build for the zero-touch sale. Again, there's no such thing, but it should be a key aspiration, because the first startup to the customer with the most acceptable solution with the lowest friction wins in our experience. How does AWS make this transformative these days? Well, again, even until 6 or 7 years ago, if you wanted to persuade a skeptical customer with a lot of money to spend, you might have to actually show up with a crap load of equipment. You might have to go hook stuff up in their data center or on their premises. You didn't have to be an appliance salesperson to do this. I mean, Salesforce, which is an incredibly successful company, actually had to go grovel at Fortune 500 companies and do a bunch of nasty, relatively unspoken of integration work to persuade some of those early customers. Today, you don't have to give a customer just a sandbox to try stuff out. You can actually clone, again, using some of the high security features that are now available in AWS, their entire frickin' infrastructure. Customers love that. We love it when you show up and say, yeah, the CIA or, Goldman Sachs or whoever was worried about X. We cloned the entire thing. We demonstrated that it worked. we have a paid POC. You want to make a VC salivate? Do that stuff. Customers are willing to start with sample data and upload stuff. One thing that we've seen some startups doing using AWS towards the zero-touch sale is they seduce the customer into putting more and more data into the sandbox, and then they turn around and sell that as a completed implementation. I think that's genius. Again, without AWS, impossible. I have no idea what is fully possible, though, with these kind of features, and I encourage you guys to all be creative about this. One thing that where AWS, in our opinion, has also been transformative in reducing risk and making startups more interesting is in the cost and complexity of post-sale. So customer freaks out in the middle of the night, says X, Y, or Z isn't working. If you're running the vast majority of that customer's infrastructure in AWS, it is now possible, either on your own or again with folks like Cloud Velocity or a variety of other solutions, to literally clone a clean copy of that customer's infrastructure and start debugging from scratch. That, again, pulls days, weeks, months, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars maybe, out of a startup's aggregate time risk and cost risk. So the more creative and cunning you guys are about that, the faster you're going to get to big funding and the more easily you're going to do so. So I actually have some examples of companies in our portfolio that have executed to some or all of these 5 easy pieces. We're going to cover who they are and a bit about how they use AWS. We're not going to do everything. The first one is a company called Blue Talon. I'm actually going to ask Eric Telenius, the CEO of the company, and next Pratik Verma, the president, founder, and CTO, to come up. You're going to need. No, they're using handheld mics. Besides, my mic has to stay live, so I can say snarky stuff while they're presenting.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I want to say a special thank you to Matt. Matt has been really, truly an incredible venture capitalist and partner for us. So anyone looking for funding, I can't recommend Data Collective highly enough.
They're not going to believe you now.
Just a quick overview of Blue Talon. I think it was a great framework to look at, these 5 easy pieces, and we've been trying to execute to that. We're an emerging leader in data collaboration. What we do is enable you to snap in databases from anywhere. It could be across enterprise boundaries, different divisions, disparate data centers, across partners, supply chains, customers, and get, through our Blue Talon virtual database, one view of all the underlying data. And we couple that with unique privacy and security logic so that each contributing database can make sure that only people who are authorized to access certain information can see that information. We're also an AWS partner. AWS has been key to us in scaling. And today, just a little bit of a soft announcement for any other developers and startups there. We're not officially announcing this yet, but coming soon, and we'd love to talk to anyone who wants to be in on the early train. We're releasing Blue Talon on AWS for developers. And what this will let you do as a developer is be able to pull from on-prem databases or a variety of different databases. So if you need data from different sources, we can plug into it, we can integrate it, and we can do that in a way that protects privacy and policy. So that's a quick overview of us, and I wanted to turn it over to Pratik, who will tell you a little bit about some of the tricks we use with AWS.
Yeah. So thanks. I'm actually loud enough. So this is what's funny about it. I was looking at, hearing about Matt talking about being brave. We're dealing with really tough customers in highly regulated industries, healthcare and finance and banks and insurance companies, hospital systems. And we don't want to build a lot of crazy stuff that already exists that can sort of get us out there faster. And so virtual private clouds, we're able to sort of combine together and think about, instead of thinking about instances, think about collections of things that work together. And we can just clone and repeat. And by the way, when you clone and repeat, you don't have to worry about screwing up in the middle. You have more secure setups, people know exactly what they're getting, and you can get started very quickly. Another thing that our tough customers really, really worry about security. They worry about separation of duties. They worry about, well, my DBA shouldn't be able to look at my data. There's this HIPAA regulation about, I can't see, social security numbers. I can't see credit card numbers, but I still need to be able to use that data. What we've been able to do is, why would we build an identity management infrastructure ourselves? We use IAM. And that way we're able to get seamless integration from the customer cloud to AWS to our application, so the customers never actually sort of break in their experience. And that's amazing. And for everybody out here, these are some of the things that you really should be using, because it really helps you engage your customers better, especially enterprise customers. With Route 53, we're able to make these URLs simpler, and then within our VPCs, we're able to take these instances and make them copy and clonable, yet keep our code simpler, so that we know that we're talking about specific entities within our cloud the same way consistently every single time. We're talking about OpsWorks, just you want to cycle, iterate faster, that's the way to do it. And one of the craziest thing is all of our customers basically are very paranoid about control of data, sensitive data. They want, if the data is going to leave their on-premises and go into the cloud, they want to use it. They don't want it to leave that cloud, and they want to preserve the provenance of that data. OpsWorks allows you to sort of spin out virtual desktops and have the ability to do all your analyses within the sandbox of having data in the cloud. And we wouldn't want to build any of that, so we can scale now. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, guys. And since these guys are actually pretty humble, no-nonsense people, I get to be a boastful jerk and talk about them. But it is actually a pretty good example of how transformative to an investor this can be. So we put in some seed money into Blue Talon while they were beginning their transformation from kind of a hybrid cloud on-premise solution, working out some of these technical problems. Once they were fully live on AWS, I can't tell you the Fortune 500 companies that they were selling, but even for sophisticated, well-run startups, a 90-day, 6-month, 9-month slog towards a paid proof of concept is pretty typical, and we in the VC business are used to that. These guys were nailing it in 4 to 6 weeks. Brand name, super paranoid, very large entities, and their clever use of AWS in some of the ways that they described was highly correlated to that. That acceleration of customer acquisition in difficult regulated industries did not escape other VCs' attention, and now these guys are the prettiest person at the ball and fielding lots of eager VCs, offering to mow their lawn on Sundays. So that's awesome for them. The folks at Drone Deploy, another one of our portfolio companies, unfortunately couldn't be here today, but this is not a drone autopilot company. This is not a drone manufacturing company. This is a company that builds very, very sophisticated software to essentially do everything that flight operations groups and data analytics groups and the FAA all do collectively today for complex overflights, both in the US and a variety of countries. So this is single-click, fully regulatory compliant automation of extremely large drone fleets for very complex or secure operations. They're also pretty efficient in dealing with huge volumes of data. So these are actually very, very high pixel resolution, very high color depth images that were done in 20 minutes from one drone with a single-click flight plan. The data was encrypted in flight, it was encrypted at rest, it was always under the control of a single customer during this demo. This is not easy stuff to do, especially if you don't happen to be the one that controls or builds the drone. So what are the things that they had to worry about from a design perspective? Well, their communication channel can't ever break. It has to deal with machines popping up and down, and it has to persist through live code pushes. Because if you're delivering 24/7 redundant operations to lots of scary customers all over the world, you can't tell some set of them, well, you know, you're down for an hour. Too bad you didn't see those rebels advancing on your oil infrastructure, or, you know, sorry about that forest fire we missed. There's very high volumes of updates arriving. These can be highly variable in size. And last but not least, the data has to be encrypted, tamper-proof, and byte by byte have verifiable provenance at all times. So what are they trying to do with this? Well, it's not just real-time delivery of the information, but it's actual processing. It's deep map analytics. It's orthorectification of data in flight. It's a variety of not just thermal imagery, but now hyperspectral information. It's real-time video, both in the visual spectrum and beyond, and it's other sensor data like LiDAR, all arriving at the same time. So these guys have to solve a sensor fusion problem in flight. So how are they doing some of this stuff with AWS? Well, they're doing very, very clever things with spot instances to keep their costs down. This is an interesting example of sort of the breakpoint between relying on AWS and doing your own clever stuff. They have figured out how to use low-cost instances dynamically across multiple availability zones in real time. So they're getting very, very high reliability at very low cost. I'm not going to go into details on how their machines receive data, but they have eliminated single points of failure pretty much in their entire infrastructure, which is non-trivial. And one of the things that they're doing, again, where they draw the line between AWS innovation and their own stuff, is they're using basic AWS NoSQL resources for reliability and uptime across AZ, but then they're adding significant performance improvements on top of that. So
what if you had a real-time window into your business, where you could be in every one of your stores, anywhere in the world, at the same time, with privacy-protected views of every product, every shelf, every display at your fingertips? It would be unprecedented, but only the beginning. Go beyond counting and measure conversion. Understand customer patterns and trends, which products are picked up the most, how people move through the store. A/B test everything and see it all in stunning, privacy-protected visualizations and reports. Prism Skylabs allows you to create the perfect experience for your customers using cameras you already have. Give every employee, from CEO to store manager, the power to unlock insights that transform your business on a global scale. And with a simple download, you can get started in minutes. Welcome to the future of visual merchandising, auditing, and business intelligence. Welcome to Prism Skylabs.
So I got ambushed a little bit by that video. But the net is, this is another portfolio company that deals with, oops, can we go back? Thank you. This is another portfolio company that deals with huge volumes of information in very short periods of time for very demanding and in some cases regulated customers. What Prism Skylabs does, as you saw, is take quote unquote dumb streams of video bits and actually turn it into highly granular object-filled correlated streams of information about what customers in what stores are looking at or touching what object at what time, all the way down to an individual customer. Now, faces are blinded for privacy, but the level of analytics that companies like Apple, for example, in its global stores receive from this is off the charts. This is a company that was able to achieve a significant amount of this technology advantage and satisfy these very demanding regulated customers using AWS. And to that end, I'm going to ask the co-founder and CTO of the company to come on up. Thanks.
Sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Oh, you know what? I scampered off with the.
There we go. This is the clicker. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. I'm Mike Fogel. I'm a VP of Engineering, actually, currently at Prism Skylabs. I'm a co-founder. We use AWS to do all of our cloud-based services, and it's done really great stuff for us. Basically, a quick overview of the company. You guys saw the video intro. From a technical standpoint, I usually say we take video and we make something better. So if you guys are familiar with watching video from security cameras, it's generally not very good. It's about as boring as you can imagine. So we can take that video and we can extract useful information from that video, and we can also provide visualizations that summarize 8 hours of video in a series of images. And how we do that is a combination of interacting with the live video streams from the cameras and AWS. So how does Prism use AWS? Currently, we use S3 to store all of our imagery and data that we upload from our customer locations. Like Matt mentioned, the at-rest encryption is a big deal for us. We have enterprise customers. We need that. S3, it's click, good. Like a lot of you guys, we use ELBs to balance our traffic, and that works fine for us. Again, it's one of these, it's simple, it works, don't over-engineer it, great. And EC2 instances to actually do our computation. One thing that's not up here too, we are using Route 53 as well, as these guys were, Blue Talon. Okay. These are different ways that we have, Prism has been differentiated from our competitors. A lot of the competitors in our space are a little bit of an older breed of company that came to the market when it was more about deploying a physical server at the location where the cameras actually are. We've used AWS to differentiate ourselves. So our deployment process can be as quick as 20 minutes, depending on the actual deployment, compared to a traditional deployment, which would be a week of actually getting the server out there to interact with the cameras. The cameras are connected directly to the cloud. That's a little bit marketing speak there. There's actually a layer of extraction of metadata that happens between the camera and the cloud. The data, we provide a infinite storage option to our customers, and we can use S3 and Glacier to make that pretty trivial. As a cloud-based solution, you can access your data wherever you are. If you're CEO of some company of locations around the world, it's simple for you to access any store from any place, which is a big game changer for compared to traditional systems. Okay, looks like we're moving on to Matt's other slides. One thing I'd like to mention before I actually give it up, though, we did do, when we were starting up Prism Skylabs in 2011, me and another founding engineer prepped pretty quick for Disrupt 2011, and we actually got second place there, and we did that in a few months. There's no way we could have done that without the infrastructure as a service systems like AWS. We used AWS, but in that first few months of the company, AWS was a total game changer for us. So, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Mike. One thing I should mention is that a critical aspect of our VC thesis is to invest in people way smarter than we are. And you're seeing that today, right up front. Speaking of people way smarter than we are, I want to talk about another company, actually was acquired a little while back, called Moleculo. Moleculo and a sister company together delivered a way from a single drop of maternal blood only a few months into a pregnancy to identify almost all potential birth defects, starting with mental retardation, trisomy, Fragile X, and a number of other things that are terrifying and debilitating for parents and children and families, and horribly costly to the medical system as well. And so what this means is, going forward, there will be no more amniocentesis. There will be no more CVS. There will be no more anxious parents wondering if the very tests that they are required to use as older parents to verify the health of their child could in fact cause a miscarriage. This is tremendously transformative in medicine, and it goes on from there. The technology that these companies developed together from a single drop of blood can identify cancer in process. So for example, Steve Jobs would have known a year in advance that his pancreas was about to become cancerous. In fact, it can detect the process down to a single handful of cells. So this technology has the potential to save tremendous numbers of lives, and the vast majority of the tech is software, and the vast majority of it was done in AWS. Let me try to give you a little more detail. KB in this case is not kilobytes, it's kilobases, a base being an amino acid that constitutes a chunk of DNA. In this case, there are 10,000 bases in a DNA molecule. A typical sequencer, something from a company like Illumina, which is the one that bought Moleculo and its sister company, chops this up into 1 to 200 base pair reads. It's the equivalent, think of it as the equivalent of a memory page. These reads are actually substantially error prone, sometimes with as much as one misread or wrong base, a T where an A or a G should be, in 1,000. Best case, 1 in a couple thousand. What Moleculo was able to do was turn one or more of these 10,000 base pair reads with crappy shotgun-like outcomes into a synthetic single read with less than 1 in 100 million errors, or one base pair out of 100 million base pairs read. So this refinement of signal, this turning scattered words screamed out by an audience full of Tourette's-afflicted sports fans into the DNA analysis equivalent of War and Peace is what allowed these medical innovations I was describing to happen. So how did they do this? Well, they took the outcome of these sequencers, this error-prone soup, they ran it through their proprietary software. It was as much as 70 gigabytes of input per sample, sometimes as many as 100 samples per day, an average of 2,000 core hours per sample. And they were able to apply their proprietary algorithm, again, done cleverly on top of existing AWS tech in large part, so they were able to focus on this, to deliver these tremendous results. But with all due respect to our host today, EC2 was pretty expensive. It accounted for 90% of the operating cost of the company, which is saying something. A little bit on their system architecture. This is not a phenomenally complicated system architecture. It's data storage for the uploads from the reads, a distributed master worker architecture for performing the analysis, and it's not strictly speaking map reduce, but there's a reduce like unification step at the end of it. So what do they turn to? Well, they turn to a theme I've mentioned once or twice before, spot instances. As you can see here from this graph, as awesome as base Amazon is, or God forbid owning your own hardware, the administrative cost of which is not represented there, spot instances are crazy efficient. So if you have this much compute work to do, you really do need to put unused global capacity to work. And that's something that Moleculo was able to achieve. They were able to do it by having this high accuracy synthetic sequencing approach, which outshone anything else in the market, represented as a fairly innovative computational graph, or graph of computation pieces, that they were then able to distribute fully in parallel across the entirety of unused spot instance capacity in the Amazon regime. That was pretty innovative. And again, because I'm a broken down old VC and not a brilliant young programmer, I've used a slightly inappropriate map reduce analogy here. It's a more subtle algorithm than that, but it gives a good general intellectual handle on how they thought about this. They were able to achieve an approximately 30x speed up also over existing approaches. So not only are they insanely accurate, they are insanely fast, meaning that they can do a significant fraction of a human genome or a human metabiome in hours to days instead of months to years. So as I mentioned, they were able to achieve a roughly 10x cost reduction. It gave them an incredibly sustainable competitive advantage. And of course, they were bought for an insane amount of money and are able to transform tens of millions of lives around the world. That's probably going into the AWS pitch book for next year. Use AWS, save millions of lives. Anyway, I wanted to save a little bit of time for questions. I'm impossible to offend, so feel free to grab or step up to a mic and ask anything that you want. I think there are mics in the aisles, and then passing one around. You can just yell.
Yeah, probably. We're close enough. Thank you for the talk, Matt, and thank you guys for sharing your experience. It's really interesting. My name is Nikita. I'm a CTO as well. I've been using AWS for 4 years now, and I am also not paid to say that. A quick question on the sort of the list of, you put up a slide with a list of things that a startup ought to be doing with respect to AWS. One of the things you mentioned was that something like 6 out of 5 startups you see don't use real-time monitoring. Why? I mean, presumably most of those folks are somewhat sophisticated engineers. Why do you think they don't do that?
You know, I should give it a little more nuance for probably. The question was, am I talking through my ass when I say that 5 out of 6 startups don't really use real-time monitoring? It's not that they don't use it at all. They're not using it effectively. So they're using it, but they're throwing away large chunks of the data, which is kind of hilarious to see big data startups gathering tremendous amounts of data and then not analyzing their own operations. Or they are running down-rev versions of the latest tools and also not getting appropriate insights. Or in some cases, they're just getting swamped by building out their stuff, and this becomes a priority 3, as you guys know, probably from your own Jira lists. There are a billion priority 3s that never get attended to, and so less by way of something that we want to criticize, and more by way of saying it's free insight to make a better company. We want to encourage people to use it. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Other folks.
Thank you for a great presentation. Quick question. Is this going to be available online anywhere to look at? Or?
Apparently, I signed away my actual genome and my home address to AWS. So not only will this be available, but I think anybody unhappy with the presentation can come find me and make me edit it up to 5 years from now.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bob's in the back. That is the agreement, right, Bob? Loosely, yes. Okay, yes. Other questions, comments? See one person back there.
So thank you. Can you elaborate more in terms of the Brave apps? What are popular out there that you are evaluating potentially in the market?
So the question is, what categories of applications or platforms I think meet the test for bravery? Okay. So we recently invested in a company called Blue River. Please don't take this as a sign that if you put blue as the first word in your company that will... I get a lot of crap for this already. Blue River is a company founded by some ex-Trimble precision agriculture people, some brilliant machine vision people out of Stanford, and some brilliant plant molecular biologists. And what they have actually done is build an implement, something you pull behind a tractor, which does local machine vision in concert with very, very intense machine vision running in the AWS cloud, to determine on a leaf-by-leaf, plant-by-plant basis how a plant is doing. So the end result of this is that while farmers are towing tractors through the fields, they can pull tens to thousands of times the volume of fertilizer, herbicide, or fungicide, or whatever, out of their kind of, scorched earth approach to farming that they're doing today. So this is a company that deals with agriculture, which is both a regulated and not always aggressively futuristic economic milieu. It is a company that proposed a radical approach to transforming this large market, and it's a company that very cleverly used AWS to dramatically reduce its cost of getting to market. This is a company that was able to go from an idea to a piece of hardware, proving in fields that it actually worked, with that analytical or computational benefit being delivered on a plant-by-plant basis on about $3 million in funding. And if this were 2002, that would be a $300 million project. So by way of example, companies that attack big regulated industries, agriculture, healthcare, deep vertical regulated supply chain intensive industries like automotive, and by that I don't mean self-driving cars, aerospace, traditional mining and manufacturing, energy. These are not easy places to persuade people that you offer value, but companies like Blue River are proving, even in the most aggressive scenario, that a transformative company that keeps its costs low enough, partially through AWS, can thrive and survive in these regulated industries. Did I answer your question?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Other questions? Again, impossible to offend. Demands for funding. Yes? I don't know, I have to check with Bob. Am I allowed to say I fund anything that's not? Okay. Kidding aside, we take the question was, do we fund only things that use AWS? No, we fund things that are capital efficient, that have deep technology, that attack large markets with a differentiated economic advantage. And so it doesn't necessarily have to use AWS for us to fund it. We've just found AWS profoundly helpful to our portfolio companies in saving our money, their equity, and our mutual sweat equity in getting to the next stage of company development. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Bob, anything from you? Okay, folks, thank you so much for your time.